and it's a great honor to speak to you all. I'm only sorry it's not being done in person in a nicer surroundings than my rather disreputable study. So I'm, as Martin said, I started off as an academic, really, statistician, mathematician, statistician, but I moved into a communication role, which I'm very grateful for sort of philanthropic funding to be able to do. And I was retiring. I was going to, relax and dig my allotment. But suddenly this COVID thing came along, and there's never been such demand for explaining statistics and numbers. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, about the risks and uncertainty, and in particular, the communication of risks and uncertainty as it relates to COVID. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, which I hope will work okay. And then I will share that and hope that you can see me. If you can't see me, if you can't see the slides, please shake your head. Okay, so that's me. I've got this Center for Risk and Evidence Communication, and I should also can't resist plugging my book, which has sold very well during a pandemic crisis. But the main thing I want to say about that is the way I start the book, which is a quote from Nate Silver, who wrote The Signal of the Noise, runs the 538 website in the States. And he's got a lovely quote, a lovely statement. He says, "The numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning." And what I take from that is that we can have masses of data. During this crisis, we've been overwhelmed with data, and yet it does not tell its own story. We require skill and insight and judgment in order to try to extract the knowledge and the information and to learn from this data. This is an art. It's not just a set of techniques that you can just make mechanical. And that's never been so true as during this crisis, where what do the numbers mean? What does a death mean? And what does a COVID death mean? What does a case mean? Suddenly become incredibly important. And fancy statistical techniques actually become rather less important. Okay, as Martin said, I've had quite a busy time. It's me on BBC. I've done a lot of interviews, TV and radio and written stuff, because there's been such a demand for statistical analysis. Here's just my brief conclusions. I think the national statistics agencies have done an extraordinary job, working very hard to get the numbers out. Huge demand from media for comments from experts, and many of these experts are not talking to the media. In a way, I don't blame them, but it is something very unfortunate that many of the main advisors to government and people doing the real work behind a lot of the advice that's going in are not talking to the media. Most journalists, I think, have acted very well, in my experience. And in the UK, we're very blessed by having this organization called the Science Media Centre, which has done a fantastic job, incredibly hard work they've done, acting as an interface between the scientists, who are producing huge amounts of work and research and papers, preprints now, and the journalists and the media. And every day we're constantly being asked to do interviews, to give advice to journalists for coverage. And that organization has really shown the way as to how good science communication can happen. I'm very proud of their work. Okay, just briefly, the sort of data we've been looking at. This is from last Tuesday from our Office for National Statistics for England and Wales, showing the COVID deaths in blue over the year, the huge spike. Also, you can see the increased number of non-COVID deaths compared with the dark line, which is the 5-year average. And now, if you look at way over the right-hand side, we're kind of just about roughly normal. And you might think, oh, well, things are fairly back to normal. They're starting to increase a bit. But you'd be wrong, because when you start going deeper, again, the data doesn't speak for itself. We have to say, well, maybe we should look at the data in a slightly different way. For example, let's look at where people are dying. And when we do that, we see that excess deaths in hospital, since the end of the big pandemic, there's been a deficit in deaths in hospitals. People have not been going to hospital. So where have they been dying? They've been dying at home. And there's no sign of that stopping. we're getting 30% extra home deaths in England and Wales. It's 100 a day. More people are dying at home. We don't, and only a few are COVID, just a handful, 1 or 2 a day. We just don't know what the quality of those deaths are. Most people would prefer to die at home, but are they getting good end-of-life care? Are they dying on their own? Are they dying because they're frightened of going to hospital? How many of them would have lived longer had they gone to hospital? We don't know that. And I've just done an interview with Sky News this morning about this. I think it is such an important issue of these hidden stories. We hear about hospitals, we hear about everything else, we hear about universities, nothing about individual families and how they're coping at home at the moment with people dying. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in, is trying to dig deeper into the data in order to reveal what we don't know. Uncertainty, we just don't know. Okay, let's talk about a few things we do know very briefly. What have been the death rates in the population? This is the pattern in England and Wales, but this pattern is reflected right across the world, right across the developed world anyway, in terms of the massive impact of age. If we look on this side, this is a standard curve showing the death rate per 100,000 people in each age group. We see for men and for women, this typical exponential increase in risk. And the problem with that, of course, is we can't see what's going on down here. If we use a logarithmic scale, we can see this extraordinary linearity on a logarithmic scale. There's no smoothing there. That is the raw data forming an absolutely dead straight line between 10-year-olds and 95-year-olds. The risk is going up at a fixed rate of 12 to 13% for each year older. That's doubling every 6 years or so. No matter how old you are, so it's double, double, double every 6 years of age. And this shows that, that age is an absolutely dominating factor. Ethnicities has some impact. Men have got about 60, 70% the extra risk of women the same age. Obviously, health conditions have an impact as well, but age is absolutely overwhelmingly important. I've put in the dashed lines. This is the normal risk that we have of dying over the peak of the epidemic. With this slightly different shape down here, we can see that this has got quite a steep increase with age, but not as steep as COVID. COVID punishes old people even more than normal life punishes old people. What about the chance of dying if you catch it? Well, it broadly follows the same pattern. The first one was the risk of catching it and dying. The risk, if you catch it, your vulnerability, generally follows the same pattern, increasing at a steep gradient. This was the estimate made back in March by Imperial College Group, very influential analysis they did based on data from Wuhan and Diamond Princess, showing, and this actually is superimposed, this is the annual risk of dying anyway, and they showed the risk of dying if you get COVID almost on top of it. Now the latest data suggests the infection fatality rate is slightly steeper, just as I showed before. But broadly speaking, this enabled us to say back in March that the risk of dying if you get COVID is roughly similar to the risk of dying of something else during the year. And I was saying that back in March. I said, but I'm supposed to be a good communicator. I work on communication. I was misinterpreted. I hadn't realized that if I said the risk of dying from COVID is roughly the same as the risk of dying from something else this year, people thought, meaning it was exactly the same. In other words, it didn't add to it. And this was the headline in one of our tabloid newspaper. Your risk of dying is no different this year, says expert. That's me. Not what I meant. I meant it doubles the risk of dying this year if you get COVID. Not that it's exactly the same, it doesn't add to it. So I got, I got on the phone, I was shouting at the journalists, swearing, and for goodness sake, how can you be so? Anyway, they changed the headline. It's not much better, but I spent a lot of time fighting with this sort of misinterpretation, and my fault for not being clear. I've made every mistake possible. Okay, these are the risks. What about uncertainty? We actually know some of these risks now. We've pretty got a good handle on these risks if you get it. And we know the risk factors that influence your vulnerability. Very good handle. And, in the UK, with 50,000 deaths, there's a lot of data now to base this on, sadly. What about the uncertainty? And I think this is interesting because there's substantial uncertainty about the science and the behavior at the moment, which has produced a lot of arguments. How much immunity is conferred after infection? How much natural immunity is in the population? What's the effect of specific measures, masks, closing restaurants, etc.? How will people react to the guidance and the laws? How will students react? You know, what are the broader consequences for society of all these measures? These are huge uncertainties. Some of them are scientific, some of them are social, some of them are about the future. And if we didn't have those uncertainties, we could design a public health policy that made appropriate trade-offs, that was kind of almost optimized, that was, you know, really did all the benefits of harm, the length of life, you know, saved by different expenditures. We could do all that stuff. We got very skilled at doing that. But to do that, we have to know what the risks are. And we don't know what these risks are. We don't know what the evidence. Now, one of the problems with uncertainty then is that, you know, obviously people have very different views about what is right for society, from an extreme sort of libertarian view, individualistic view, to a more, the other end, a very communitarian view of individual sacrifice for the benefit of the greater good. These groups are becoming increasingly polarized in their debate about COVID because this uncertainty allows them all to claim that their views are based on evidence. I get email after email from extreme skeptics about lockdown and things like that, saying, oh, the data show this, that, and the other. And you know, everyone can claim the data support their viewpoint. And there are reasonable scientific disputes, of course. But the problem is that these are currently being played out in the media rather than scientific meetings like this. And they're leading to this public polarization, which I think is very unfortunate, but of course resembles so much of what happens with climate change as well. Okay, just to finish off then, were these risks foreseen? We've got in the UK a public National Risk Register of Civil Emergencies, 2017. This is the last edition for this. If we look at this, we can see this, what I regard as this horrible image here of lots of different emergencies that might happen, with axes showing the impact on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, likelihood 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not defining what those mean, just here are numbers. And we got a key. I thought looks like the risk of being invaded by the Romans again, but you know, no, it's not. If we look in the key, we find this is public disorder. And so these are the most likely risks that are put into our risk register. And up here is pandemic influenza. Now, as being the most likely and the most harmful, the one where all the focus has been on. Sitting down here is emerging infectious disease like SARS or MERS. And this was put way down here with the idea that maybe 100 or 200 deaths. And this is what's happened. This is what's actually happened. So no wonder our preparation was, actually completely inadequate because of where it was on the risk register. It's perfectly rational that we weren't doing. It's in there with space weather and so on. So you think that you should have had some attention, but it didn't get much. The thing that really annoys me is this scale 1 to 3, 4, 5. Well, what does it mean? In fact, this means from 0.5% to 5% likelihood of occurring in the next 5 years. So that's each year, the risk of it happening is between 1 in 100 and 1 in 1,000. So these were considered as less than 1 in 100-year events, which I find quite extraordinary. They were given so low likelihood. And this is a logarithmic scale. This is roughly 10 times as likely as this and 10 times as likely as that. But that's not at all clear from the presentation. This is one of the worst examples of risk communication I've seen. Okay, what about uncertainty though? We know this is, a point estimate. Okay, there's a range, but it's pretty well a point estimate. To find the uncertainty, we have to go for the classified, the secret national security risk assessment, which I actually helped work on under, Official Secrets Act, of course, under my security clearance that I've got. But I could never speak about it. But it actually has, a leaked copy got to some journalists earlier this year. And they could reveal, this is the national security. So this is official, sensitive, classified material that I'm sure that I shouldn't be seeing, even though I worked on it, I shouldn't be seeing. And what they did when they were looking at emerging infectious disease, there it is plonked in the middle of the risk matrix, but they reflect the uncertainty about this. Look, the arrows, here we are, blown up a bit, very bad copy because this is a stolen copy from, or a leaked copy, showing the uncertainty around this point estimate is huge. It could be anywhere in here. And that's quite right, that's quite reasonable that it could be anywhere else. And it's ended up, of course, being up in the top right-hand corner. So for the classified material, that uncertainty was reflected. And also what was reflected is that it's got a lovely quote down here, this risk assessment has got low confidence. So privately, they can acknowledge that they don't know what the risks are. They're not confident in their assessment at all. A lot of uncertainty. Now, that does not appear to have been acted on appropriately, but it does show there was some much more nuanced thinking going on that wasn't being communicated publicly. Okay, to conclude, I think risk and uncertainty communication needs to be taken very seriously indeed, and not just privately between government departments, but with the public. The COVID crisis has made this very clear indeed. A quick, I would say this, wouldn't I? Statisticians have shown themselves to be wonderful and helpful people and without strong agendas. But I emphasize the without strong agendas because I've got very upset at the, what I regard a lot of the communication that's been done by government departments has often been, I think, very manipulative. It's not been open and unbiased just to inform people. It's been trying to affect our feelings and, of course, affect our behavior. I believe, and this is my pure judgment, but I believe an ethical judgment, that the public who have made so many sacrifices should expect to receive clear, unbiased and non-manipulating information that acknowledge the uncertainties and allow them to make informed decisions. But this does not happen. Okay, so in that, I'm now going to stop there.